At 26, Hannah Mercer had $41, a duffel bag, and a mother 3 months in the ground who'd never once said the name of the town she came from. She had a phone 2 payments from going dark, a coat that used to be her mother's, and a long habit of leaving places before places could leave her first. That was the whole inventory. You can fit a life that small into an overhead bin and still have room left over for your boots. Roanoke was just the town where the bus stopped and the work was. A developer named Garrett Voss needed a dead man's print shop emptied by Friday, cash for whoever showed up and didn't ask questions. Hannah showed up. She didn't ask questions. She had no way of knowing the job would hand her back the one thing her mother had spent a whole life burying. The temp office over on Williamson Road sent her out with an address and a warning. "Voss don't like slow," the woman behind the desk said, not bothering to look up. "And he don't like questions. Show up, keep your head down, you'll get paid." That was the entire orientation. In Hannah's experience, it usually was. Campbell Avenue ran straight through the old rail district downtown, a row of soot-bricked storefronts that had watched freight trains come and go for 100 years. Half of them were dark now, their windows soaped over. At the end of every street, the Blue Ridge sat blue and patient, like it was waiting out the whole city. And up on Mill Mountain, the big star caught the gray morning light and held onto it. 2 blocks over, the market was setting out its stalls for the few who still came downtown to buy a thing with their hands. The trains hadn't stopped. They still ran at 2 in the morning, and the horns still found their way into every empty room in Roanoke, whether anybody lay awake to hear them or not. The shop sat at the dead end of the block, where Campbell ran out of road. A narrow brick front, one big window gone milky with 30 years of grime, a door somebody had painted gray a long time ago and never touched again. No sign over it. Whatever name the place used to wear had been rolled flat under cheap primer, so the front just sat there saying nothing at all, the way a house goes quiet after the people are gone. A black truck idled at the curb, too clean for the street it was parked on. Garrett Voss climbed out without bothering to shut it off. He was maybe 50, with the easy, unbothered face of a man who had never once been the one getting cleared out. He looked at Hannah the way he looked at the building, which is to say he was already pricing what came after both of them. "You the one they sent? Hannah Mercer. Don't need the name." He was already moving toward the door, keys out. Needed empty. He unlocked the front and let the smell roll out at her, oil and old paper and something colder underneath, the mineral smell of a place that hadn't been warm in a long time. Inside, the dark was full of shapes. A big iron press squatted in the middle of the floor like a sleeping animal. Tall cabinets of little shallow drawers ran along both walls. Paper everywhere, stacked and yellowed and curling at the edges, and over all of it, a soft gray dust that had been settling for 3 decades and meant to settle 3 more. "Junk," Voss said, before she could take any of it in. "Junk and a dead man's clutter. You bag it, you haul it, you don't sort it, you don't keep it. None of it's worth the gas to cart off." He towed a wooden tray of little metal pieces and let it rattle. Lots worth more as a hole in the ground than this whole thing's worth standing up. He almost smiled when he said it, like the hole was already dug and already paying him back. Then he dug a ring of brass keys out of his coat and tossed it at her. Hannah caught it against her chest. A dozen keys, maybe more, old and worn smooth, heavy in her hand as a closed fist. "Front, back, closet, whatever fits," he said. "Half of them don't open anything anymore. There's one room in the back I never got into, padlocked. No key on there fits it, and I'm not paying a locksmith to come look at junk. Don't waste your day on it." He counted bills into her palm without being asked, crisp ones, off a fold thick enough to make a point. 300 now. 300 Friday when I can walk in here and see floor. He folded the rest away. "Don't make me come looking for floor." And then he was back in the truck and gone up Campbell, and the quiet came down over the shop like a second coat of that gray dust. Hannah stood in the middle of it with $600 worth of somebody's entire life and 4 days to make all of it disappear. When you own almost nothing, a room full of another person's everything is a strange place to be left standing. The heat had been off so long, the cold had soaked into the brick and stayed there. She could see her own breath. She zipped her mother's coat to the throat, set the duffel by the door where she could keep an eye on it, and got to work the only way she knew how, which was to start. 4 days, $600 on the far side of them, 41 in her pocket on this side. She'd slept 2 nights in the bus station and 1 in a motel that took cash, and the math only came out right if Friday arrived and Voss got to see his floor. So she would give the man his floor. She had the first trash bag half shaken open when she noticed the old man at the fence. He stood on the sidewalk side of the chain link, hands deep in the pockets of a canvas coat gone soft with age, just looking in. Not the way people look at a wreck on the road. The way people look at a grave they still visit. He had to be 80. He didn't wave or call out. He just watched her drag the bag toward the press, and then he said, loud enough to carry across the lot, "You won't want to bag that one." Hannah stopped.
You knew
Bag
what was
what?
happening inside that
The
house,
press.
didn't you?
He lifted his chin at the
All
iron
these
shape in the
years,
middle of the
and you
floor.
never said a word.
Walter set more truth on
I
that
told him the
machine than the
truth.
county paper managed
It
in
might not
50
be
years.
enough.
Be a sin to scrap it
But
for the
it's all
brass.
I have left.
You knew the man who had this place. 40 years at the stone, right beside him. He said it plain and flat, no weight on it at all. The way old men hand you something heavy by pretending it's light. Eldon Krauss. I was setting type in this shop while your Mr. Voss was still in short pants. Voss know you're out here giving his inventory a eulogy? It came out sharper than she meant. 4 days of work waited behind her, and she was tired before she'd lifted a thing. Something close to a smile moved through the old man's face and was gone. Voss don't know much. He bought himself a block and decided that was the same as knowing what's on it. He looked past her, into the dark of the shop, at something she couldn't see from where she stood. Walter ran this place alone the last 30 years, raised a girl up in the rooms over the shop. She ran off young, never wrote, and he never said one hard word about her. Not one. Just kept the press cold and the lights paid and waited on a letter that never came. What happened to him? Got old. Got tired. Eldon said it gently, the way you set down something that might still break. One morning the press didn't get turned on, and that was that. Hannah didn't have anything to say to that, so she said nothing, which the old man seemed to take as good manners. He pushed himself off the fence. "I'll be around," he said. "I'm always around." And he went back up Campbell the slow way, like a man with nowhere he needed to be and nobody at home counting the minutes until he got there. Hannah went back to the bags. That was the job. Bag, haul, seafloor by Friday. Collect the back half of the money, ride the next bus to the next town that didn't know her face. She'd done it in 3 other cities. You learn not to look too hard at what's in a room. Looking slows you down, and slow doesn't get paid. But this shop made it hard. Every box she opened was somebody's care. Wedding invitations still folded in their tissue. Church bulletins, funeral cards, a high school graduation program 50 years old, the ink on it still crisp and proud. A cigar box of worn rubber stamps, a cash drawer with 3 pennies, and a coat button rolling in the tray. Behind the counter, a framed photograph lay face down in a drawer, and she set it aside without turning it over. The way you put off the heavy thing when there is still so much light work left to do. Walter had printed the small, true moments of an entire town, one careful page at a time, and the town had let the lights go out on him anyway and never sent so much as a card back. Over the long bank of type cabinets, painted by hand in block letters gone amber with the years, ran a line she read 3 times without understanding it. Some formas you never break. She didn't know what a forme was. Printers talk, she figured. Some rule of the trade, the kind of thing a man paints on his own wall to keep from forgetting a thing he's afraid he'll forget. The press held the heart of the room, black iron and worn brass, a machine built to outlast every hand that ever touched it. Cold under her palm. On its flank, a round ink drum sat sealed shut beneath a hard crust of dried ink, and something about how completely it had been closed up sat wrong with her. She left it alone. At the back of the shop, a low door waited under a padlock the size of her fist, the one room Voss said no key would open. She left that alone too. A drum she had no reason to open and a door she had no key for, and 4 days to stop noticing things exactly like that. By the middle of the afternoon, the filthy front window had bothered her past ignoring. She took a wet rag to it, only to let some daylight in to work by. The grime came off in long gray sheets, and under it, low, where the glass met the wooden frame, the ghost of old gold lettering began to rise up to meet her, stenciled there by a careful hand a long time ago and painted over once the shop went quiet. She rubbed harder. Letters. An arc of them. The proud kind that used to ride across every shop window in America. She worked the rag into the corner, and the last of the grime gave way, and the name came up whole under her hand. Price. Hannah went still. Not the ordinary still of a tired girl on a job she wanted finished. The other kind. The kind that comes when the floor of your life shifts a ½ inch under your boots and your body feels it a long moment before your mind agrees to. Price. Her mother's name. The one her mother had signed on the backs of old photographs and scratched off every form that dared to ask for it. The maiden name she'd carried around like a splinter under the skin and never once explained. 26 years, and her mother had never once named the town she came from. And here it was, painted in gold on a window in Roanoke, in a dead man's shop that Hannah Mercer had been hired to erase by Friday. For a long moment, Hannah didn't move. The wet rag hung from her fingers and dripped gray water onto the floorboards, and out in the yard, a freight came easing down the line with that long, low groan the whole city had quit hearing years ago. Price. 5 letters in old gold, patient under 30 years of grime, looking back at her like they had been waiting on this exact gray morning to be found. She told herself the things you tell yourself. It is a common enough name. The world is full of names. A word on a window in a town she had never set foot in until yesterday could not reach across her whole life and mean something. But her mouth had gone dry the way it only goes when the body has already understood a thing the mind is still standing in the road arguing about. Because her mother had carried that name like a stone in her shoe. Price. She had signed it on the backs of old photographs in a small, tight hand and then scratched it off every form that came into the house asking where she was from. Hospital paperwork, school cards, the lease on every apartment they ever left in the night. Where it said place of birth, she drew a line straight through, and where it said maiden name, she wrote nothing at all. And if Hannah asked, and Hannah learned young not to ask, her mother would only say that some places you leave on purpose and you do not draw a map back. Now here was the map, painted by hand on a window in the old rail district of Roanoke, Virginia, on a shop a stranger was paying her to wipe off the face of the earth by Friday. Hannah set the rag down on the sill. The trash bag she had half filled sat slumped against the press, and she looked at it like it belonged to some other girl, the one who had walked in 2 hours ago needing nothing but a floor and $600. That girl was having a harder time getting back to work than she should have been, so she stopped bagging, and she started reading the room. The ledgers stood in a long row on the shelf behind the counter, black cloth spines furred soft with handling. She pulled one down, and the dust lifted off it in a sheet. Inside, in a small upright hand, was every job the shop had ever turned out, going back years. 200 wedding programs for a church over on Jefferson, a run of funeral cards, raffle tickets for the volunteer fire company. Beside each one, a price. And most of the prices were the kind you could tell a man had shaded down because he knew the family. Charged for the paper, did not charge for the work. Over and over down the column, the labor given away for nothing. The way a man gives a thing away when the giving is the only part he still wants. She pulled down the last book in the row. The entries ran on in that same steady hand, year after year, and then on a page near the back, the hand simply stopped. The final line was a date some 3 years gone, and a single job, 50 memorial cards, no name beside it for who they were meant to mourn. After that line, the pages were blank, all the rest of them, clean and waiting and never filled. A man's whole working life ran right up to one morning, and then it did not start again. Eldon had told her how it went. The press did not get turned on, and that was that. She found the photograph where she had left it, face down in the drawer behind the register. She had put off turning it over the way you put off the heavy thing while there is still light work to do, and there was no light work left now. She turned it over. A young woman stood in front of the shop, 17, maybe 18. The gold letters on the window were whole and bright behind her. Price arched clear over her shoulder, so the picture had been taken in some summer when the place still wore its name out loud. She was squinting into the sun, and halfway into a laugh she plainly did not want caught, one hand coming up to wave the camera off. And she had Hannah's jaw, the same square set to it, the same stubbornness built right into the bone. Hannah had spent 26 years looking at that jaw in motel mirrors and the dark glass of late buses. It was her mother's jaw. It was her own. It was the face her mother must have worn before the leaving ever started, before the scratched-off forms, when she was still a girl in a Roanoke summer standing in front of her father's shop and laughing at whoever held the camera. Hannah sat down slow on the cold floor with the picture in both hands. You have most likely already put together what Hannah was only now letting herself feel, that the girl in the photograph and the mother 3 months in the ground and the gold name on the window were all one thread, that the dead man who had kept these lights paid alone for 30 years was closer to her than any stranger had a right to be. She was not there yet. She was getting there the slow way, one cold fact at a time, the way you have to when it is your own blood you are uncovering. She did not hear the old man come back. When she looked up, he was on the other side of the glass, on the sidewalk, looking in through the clean patch she had rubbed, and his eyes went from her face down to the letters she had uncovered and back up to her face again, and something in him changed. He came around and she let him in. Up close, he was older than he had looked from the fence, the skin of his hands gone to paper, but his eyes were steady, and they were not unkind. "You found the window," he said. "Price." Her own voice came out rough. "The man who had this shop. What was his whole name?" "Walter Price." Eldon said it the way you set a stone down careful on a grave. Ran this place 50 years and put his name on that glass like he meant it to outlast him. Painted over now. Voss had a man prime the front the same week he bought the block. Said a dead man's name was bad for selling what comes after. Hannah held the photograph up so he could see it, and her. The old man looked at the girl in the picture for a long time. "That's the daughter," he said finally. "Quiet. Walter's girl. She run off the summer she turned 18, near about when that very picture was took. There was trouble in this house, the kind families make for themselves and then can't unmake. She got on a bus one night, and she did not write, and she did not come back. Not when he was sick, not at the end." He looked up from the photo to Hannah's face, to her jaw, and she watched him do the same arithmetic she had just done, sitting on the floor. "Lord," he said, soft. "You've got her look all over you." Hannah could not make her voice work, so she just held his eyes. "She, your mother," Eldon said. It was not a question. She passed, 3 months back. Saying it in this room, in front of this man, in front of that window, made it land in her all over again, fresh as the first morning. She never told me where she was from. Not the town, not his name, not one word. I didn't know I had a... She stopped. The word grandfather sat too big in her mouth to get out. I didn't know there was anybody at all. Eldon was quiet a while. Then he looked past her, up at the line painted in block letters over the long bank of cabinets, the one she had read 3 times that morning without understanding. "Some form is you never break." "You've been wondering on that," he said. I can see it on
That's
you.
the final stage.
What's a for
Let
me?
it cool slowly
He crossed to the
overnight,
nearest cabinet and
and then
slid
it's
out one of the
officially
shallow
done.
drawers, and it was full of type. Hundreds of little metal letters stood up in their compartments, each one no bigger than a grain of rice. He picked one out and held it up so the dim light caught the face of it. You set a page by hand, letter by letter, backward, all of it locked up tight in an iron frame so it can't shift when the press bears down on it. That locked up page of metal, that's a form. Walter and me set 10,000 of them at that stone, standing right there, shoulder to shoulder, 40 years. He turned the little letter in his fingers. When a job's run and done, you break the form. Take it apart, drop the type back in the cases, melt the slugs down for the next thing. Lead is dear. You don't let a page sit locked up holding metal you could be using. That's the whole trade. You break it, you melt it, you set it again. Everything gets used twice. He set the letter back in its slot, gentle, like it might feel the drop. But every printer's got a few he won't break. A wedding line, a child's name, something he set the once and can't bring himself to melt back down into nothing. So he keeps it locked, keeps it standing. It's bad business, and every one of us did it. He nodded up at the painted words. That was Walter's joke and Walter's gospel both. Some formies you never break, meaning some things you set down one time, you keep them set. Even when the using is over, even when it costs you, especially then. Before he left, Eldon stopped at the mouth of the little hallway that ran to the back of the shop, where the low door sat under its padlock the size of her fist. He stood looking at it the way he had stood looking at the building from out at the fence. He kept to that room the last few years, the old man said. The composing room. Did his close work back there and locked it behind him when he was done. Toward the end, he was in there more than he was out. He laid his hand flat on the door just for a second. I asked him once what he was setting that took so long. He told me he was setting the only thing he had left to say, and he was bound to get it right before he ran out of time to say it. Eldon took his hand back off the wood. Never showed me. Never showed a living soul. Then one morning, the press stayed cold, and the room stayed shut, and it has stayed shut ever since. Voss says there's no key to it. Voss says a great many things. He looked at the ring of brass keys where it lay on the counter, the one Voss had thrown at her chest that morning. He did not say a word about it. He just looked at it, and then he looked at her, and then he went out the gray door and up Campbell Avenue the slow way, an old man walking home to a house where nobody was counting his minutes. Hannah did not get back to the bags. She sat with the photograph until the light coming through the cleaned patch of window went from gray to gold and then from gold to blue, the way the light goes in a Roanoke evening when the sun drops behind the ridge and the star up on Mill Mountain comes on over the whole city. The shop turned cold around her, colder than the day had been, and she barely felt it. Somewhere across her whole life, her mother had sat with a secret this exact shape and never once set it down, had carried it into the ground rather than say the word price out loud the one time to the only person left who had a right to hear it. Hannah was tired of leaving rooms before they could mean anything to her. For once in her life, she wanted to stay inside of one long enough to find the bottom of it. She got up off the floor. Her legs had gone stiff with the cold. She crossed to the counter and picked up the ring of keys, and they were heavy in her hand, a dozen and more. Old brass, worn smooth as river stones, every one of them cut for a lock in this building by some hand long gone to dust. Voss had said half of them did not open anything anymore. Voss had said the room in the back had no key, that none of these would fit it, that she should not waste her day on it. Voss had stood in this shop full of a man's entire life and called it junk and a hole in the ground that paid him back. She was about done, taking Garrett Voss at his word. She went down the little hallway to the low door at the back. The padlock hung off a heavy iron hasp, old and freckled with rust, the body of it near as big as her fist, just like he had said. She knelt down in front of it. The last of the light came thin and blue through a dirty transom over the door and laid itself right across her hands and the brass, so the keys caught it and held it. She started working them into the lock one at a time. The first was too big to even enter. The second went in and would not turn. The third stuck halfway and she had to work it back out with her nails. She tried a fourth and a fifth, kneeling on the cold boards in a dead man's hallway, while the trains called to one another out in the yard and the dark climbed slow up the walls. And one by one the keys went in and did nothing, and she understood she was not going to be talked out of trying every last one of them before she quit. The ninth key was smaller than the rest, darker, worn so smooth the teeth of it had gone almost soft. She had passed it over twice because it looked too slight to matter to anything. She fitted into the body of the lock and it slid in clean, all the way, with a small oiled certainty. Not one of the others had, and it turned. The lock came open in her hands with a small, dull weight, the shackle swinging loose of the hasp. And for a moment, Hannah just knelt there in the blue dark, holding the body of it, surprised the way you are surprised when a thing you have leaned your whole self against finally gives. She had bent so hard toward this door that now it had opened, she did not know what to do with her own hands. She set the padlock down on the floorboards beside her, careful, the way Eldon had set the little letter back in its slot, and she pushed the low door inward, and it swung on its hinges with a long, soft groan that ran up the back of her neck. The smell came out to meet her first. Oil and metal and old paper, the same as the front room, but thicker here, closed in, aged the way the air in a church basement is aged. Like nobody had stirred it in a long while, and it had settled into the corners and gone still. Under it was something sharper she would later learn to call ink, the real kind. The kind that comes in a can and never fully dries down at the bottom. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes find the shapes of things in the dark, and then she felt along the frame with her palm and found an old toggle switch, and she pushed it up, and somewhere overhead a single bulb came on behind a green metal shade and threw a circle of hard yellow light down into the middle of the room. It was a small room, smaller than the front by half, and it was not a junk room was the first thing she understood. Everywhere else in the building a man had let things pile and slide, but in here everything had a place and everything was in it. The type cases stood in a bank along one wall, their shallow drawers shut square. A composing stone, a slab of gray rock set into a heavy table, sat scrubbed clean in the center under the light, not a fleck on it. Tools hung on a board above it on nails, each one with its painted outline behind it, so a man could tell at a glance what was missing, and nothing was missing. This was the room of someone who had let the rest of his life go soft around the edges, so he could keep one room exactly right. And in the middle of it, square in the cone of yellow light, stood the press. It was a black iron thing, taller than she had pictured a press, all wheels and arms and a great flat disc up top tilted toward her like a face. It had the look of something built to outlast the men who ran it, and it had. But that was not what stopped her breath in her chest. What stopped her was the frame locked into the heart of it, an iron rectangle clamped tight in the jaws of the machine, and inside the rectangle, packed in solid, the small gray faces of 1,000 pieces of type, set, locked, standing, a formie. She knew the word now. Eldon had given it to her not 3 hours ago, turning a single letter in the front room light. You set a page by hand, backward, and you lock it in an iron frame so it can't shift. And that locked up page is a form. And when the job is run, you break it, you melt it down, you set it again, because lead is dear and you do not let metal sit. Everything gets used twice. That was the whole trade. This one had not been broken. This one had been set and locked and left standing in the press for years, holding its metal, holding whatever it said, while a man got sick and stopped coming, and the lights stayed on out front and the room stayed shut behind its fist of a padlock. Hannah crossed the little room slow and went down on her knees in front of the press the way she had gone down in front of the door, and she put her face close to the type, and she tried to read it. She could not. Of course she could not. It was backward. Every letter of it flipped and mirrored the way Eldon had said, built to read true only once it had bitten into paper, and to her eye it was just a field of little reversed shapes, close packed, dense, a whole page of words turned away from her on purpose. She ran her fingertip light across the face of it and felt the cool of the metal and the fine ridges where one letter ended and the next began. Hundreds of them, set by hand, one at a time, by an old man alone in a locked room with all the time in the world running out on him. She could feel that it was words. She could feel that it was a lot of words, more than a card, more than a notice, a long thing, a careful thing. She just could not feel what they were. You have most likely already guessed what was set in that iron frame. Hold on to the not knowing a moment longer, the way Hannah had to, because she was not done finding things in that room. She stood up off her knees and her eye went back to the press, to the big flat disc tilted up top, the one she had taken for the face of the thing. It was the ink disc, though she did not have the word yet. A wide round plate where a printer worked his ink out thin before the rollers carried it down, and it was not clean. Where every other surface in this scrubbed and ordered room had been wiped and squared and kept, the ink disc had something sitting on it, tucked up under the curve of the roller arm where it would not fall, where you would not see it unless you came around to the side and looked the way she was looking now. An envelope. It had been a pale color once and had gone the brown of strong tea with the years. It was thick, padded out from inside with whatever it held, and the flap of it was folded down and sealed with a circle of red wax, gone dark and hard, pressed once with the ball of a thumb so the thumbprint still sat in it, the last mark of a hand. Across the front, in that same small upright print she had been reading all afternoon in the ledgers, in the row of given away jobs, in the last unfilled page, was one word: Hannah. Just her name. Her own name on an envelope in a dead man's hand, sealed up and set on the one surface in his most private room where he would see it every single time he stood at the press. She had stopped breathing again, and she made herself start. She lifted the envelope off the disc, and it was heavier than paper had a right to be, weighted in the corner, something stiff and flat inside sliding under her fingers. She turned it over. Nothing on the back but the wax and the thumbprint. She turned it again to the front. Hannah. Not a stranger's Hannah. Not a coincidence of a name on a window. Her name, set apart and saved, the way you save the one thing in the fire you go back in for. She broke the seal. The old wax came away in a single dark chip, and she worked the flap up and reached inside, and her fingers found, first, the stiff flat things, and she drew them out into the green light. Bonds. United States savings bonds. The real engraved kind. A small, thick sheaf of them, held with a paper band gone soft as cloth. She fanned them with her thumb. Each one carried a date up in the corner, and the dates climbed year by year, one a season apart near enough, going back and back more than 20 years of them. A man buying a small bond and putting it away and buying another the next year and putting it away. Patient, steady, the way he had done everything. And on the line where each one named who it was bought for, who it was meant for, in that small upright hand, every single time, the same two words. Hannah Mercer. Her name. Not Price. Mercer. Her own name. The name on her own driver's license folded in her own thin wallet in the duffel bag on the floor of the front room. Bought and set aside 1 year at a time by a man she had been told was a stranger before she could walk, before she could talk, while she and her mother were 3 states away leaving apartments in the night and drawing lines through the box that asked where they were from. There was a letter folded behind the bonds. One sheet, printed, not handwritten, run off on his own press in his own type, so the words sat crisp and black and even on the page the way nothing from a pen ever sits. And she understood without being told that he had set this too, by hand, backward, because some things a man cannot trust to his own shaking hand at the end and can only trust to the trade he gave his life to. She held it under the bulb and she read it. And the room went very quiet around her, and out in the yard a long way off, a freight horn pulled across the dark over Roanoke and faded. It was not long. He was not a man of many words even when he had a press to make them with. He wrote that if she was reading this, then she had found her way to the back room at last, and that he had hoped she would, and had feared she would not, in equal measure, for longer than she had been alive. He wrote that he had tried, that when her mother left, he had gone to the law and asked the law to let him stand for the child, to be named her guardian, to have the right to know her, and that the law had heard him and had told him no. That there had been hard words spoken in a courthouse not 8 blocks from where she now knelt, on Campbell Avenue, in the city they both came from, and that the doors had closed, and that a man could not make a daughter come home, and could not make a court give him a grandchild, and could not do anything in the end but the one thing nobody could stop him from doing. He could keep her name. He could set it in metal and lock it up, and never let it be broken down and melted and used for something else, the way everything in his trade got broken down and used for something else. He could keep one form standing for 30 years that said who she was and who he was to her, and he could wait, and he could leave the lights on. She read the last line 3 times. "I could not come and get you," it said. "So I set you down here where you would be safe, and I left the door for you to find. Some forms you never break." Hannah sat down on the cold floor of the composing room with the letter in one hand and the bonds in the other, and her grandfather's locked words standing in the press above her, and she did not cry the loud way. She cried the quiet way, the way her mother had taught her without ever meaning to, the way you cry when you have spent a whole life being the only one in the room and you have just found out, too late by 3 months and 30 years, that you never once were. She did not hear the truck pull up out front. She heard the door. It was the gray front door, dragged open hard on its bad hinge, and then boots on the plank floor, unhurried, heavy, a man who walked into other people's buildings like he already had the deed in his pocket. She knew the step before she heard the voice. She got up off the floor fast and slid the letter and the bonds back into the brown envelope and the envelope into the chest pocket of her coveralls and buttoned it down flat against her heart. And she came out of the little hallway into the front room, wiping her face with the back of her wrist, as Garrett Voss came around the press, shaking rain off the shoulders of a coat that cost more than everything she owned. "You're still here," he said. Not pleased, not displeased, just noting it the way he noted everything, as a fact that might cost him or might not. His eyes went past her down the hall to the low door standing open, to the dark of the back room behind it, and something moved across his face and was gone. That room was locked. "It was," Hannah said. He looked at her a beat too long. Then he reached into his coat and took out a folded paper of his own. No wax on it, no thumbprint, just a county seal and a date, and he held it up between 2 fingers. "Permit cleared this afternoon," he said. "Machines come Monday. I moved it up." He looked around the shop, at the ledgers, at the press, at the bank of cabinets and the painted line above them, and he smiled the smile of a man pricing a hole in the ground. "Whatever you think you found back there, sweetheart, it comes down with the rest of the junk Monday morning. So have it empty by Friday, like we said, and don't get attached. Nobody ever got rich getting attached to a dead man's clutter." He set the permit on the counter beside the ring of brass keys, square in the light so she would have to look at it. And Hannah looked at it, and then she looked at him, with her grandfather's words locked standing in the press at her back, and her grandfather's name folded warm over her heart. And for the first time in her whole moving, leaving, line-drawing life, she felt the particular stillness of a person who has finally found the one room she is not going to walk out of. "Friday," she said. "I heard you." And she let him think that was a yes, the truck took Garrett Voss off down Campbell Avenue with the wipers going, 2 red lights shrinking toward the underpass, and then the rain had the wet street to itself, and Hannah was alone in the front room with the permit lying on the counter where he had set it, and the ring of brass keys beside it, and the brown envelope buttoned flat inside her coveralls. She did not reach for a trash bag. She did not touch the broom leaned in the corner. She crossed to the front door and hauled it open on its sour hinge and stepped out under the little tin awning into the cold. And she looked down the block toward the alley fence, where an old man sat in an older truck with the cab. Light burning, not driving off, not coming in, the way a man waits when he has somewhere he ought to be and cannot make his own hands turn the key and go. "Eldon!" she called across the rain, and the word came out of her broken in the middle, and he had the truck door open before she finished it. Like he had stood watch at that fence the whole gray length of the day, only to hear somebody say his name and mean come inside. He came in, stamping the wet off his boots, and pulled his cap off when he saw the low door standing open at the back of the hall, the green dark of the composing room behind it. And he stopped flat in the middle of the floor and held the cap against his chest with both his old hands. "He let you in the back," Eldon said, and it was not a question. It was close to a prayer, because no breathing soul had been through that door in years, and the only man who could have handed over the key was past the handing of anything at all. She did not answer him with words. She turned and walked back down the little hall, and he followed, and they stood together under the green-shaded bulb over the composing stone, the two of them in front of the black iron press with the form locked, standing in its jaws. "I can't read it," Hannah said. "I tried. It's all turned around. It's meant to be." Eldon set his cap on the stone and rolled his cuffs slow, one and then the other, and his hands, when he lifted them toward the press, were not an old man's hands anymore. They were a pressman's, sure and easy, 40 years deep in the muscle. You don't read a formie with your eyes, girl. A formie don't speak till it's inked and pulled. Walter set this so it could only ever say itself, the once, the right way, on the day somebody who belonged to it came and pulled the sheet. He took down a flat can from the shelf and worked the lid off with a knife, and there it was, the real ink, black as a well, and he laid a thin worm of it across the round disc up top with the blade and began to turn the great flywheel slow by hand, so the disc rotated a notch, and the rollers rode up and took their charge and came down glistening over the locked face of the type. He did it twice more, patient, building the ink, the small room filling with the smell of it, sharp and green and alive, in a way the dead-still air had not been in years. Somewhere down in the rail yard, a freight let go one long, low note, and the night took it, and Eldon kept turning the wheel. You already know more or less what was waiting in that metal. Hannah did not yet, not in any way her eyes could hold. And there is a difference between a thing you have half guessed and a thing you watch come up wet out of the dark in front of you. Eldon took a single clean sheet from a flat between 2 boards, creamy and thick, and he laid it square on the platen and folded the gripper down to hold it, and he looked at her once over his shoulder. "Your hand or mine?" "Hers," she said barely. So he set her 2 hands on the spokes of the wheel over his own, and together they brought it round, slow, and the platen swung up and closed against the locked form with a deep iron sound she felt in her back teeth. A kiss and a press and a long-held breath of metal laid against paper, and then they rolled it open again, and Eldon lifted the gripper and peeled the sheet up by one corner and turned it into the light. And there it was. Forward at last, black and exact, each letter pressed into the paper with a weight no pen could ever carry. At the top, set off and alone, in the careful, upright face she had been reading all the long day in the ledgers and the slots, and the last unfilled page. For Hannah Mercer, the granddaughter they would not let me claim. And beneath it, ruled and squared and laid out clean as a county document, because that is what it was, the words of a deed. a deed of gift. The soot brick storefront, the lot it stood on, the press and the type, and the stone and every tool hung on the wall in its painted place, the whole of it, set over from Walter Price to Hannah Mercer, his daughter's daughter, free and clear and forever. Hannah put 2 fingers to her own name on the wet sheet. Light. The way you touch a face you are not sure is really there. And the ink came away black on her fingertip, and she understood that she was the first living person to read these words the way they were built to be read, and that the man who built them had set every letter of her name by hand and then waited the rest of his life in a locked room for her to come and lift it off the metal. Eldon was not looking at the sheet at all. He had bent down over the chase itself, over the backward lead, and his lips were moving, reading the mirror of it the way only a man of 40 years at the trade can read it, straight off the metal. And when he came to the end, he straightened up, and his eyes were bright and wet in the green light, and he said it to the room, low, like a man swearing to a thing in front of a witness. That's a deed. He set you a deed. His voice went rough in his throat. I stood right there by that stone the day he composed it. I set the rule lines for him because his hands had already started to go. He had a lawyer come down from the market and draw it up proper and sign it and seal it, and he had me put my own name to it as witness. And then he locked the for me and brushed that line up over the cabinets and never once let me speak of it to a living soul. Hannah looked where he tipped his head, to the bank of type cabinets along the wall and the words brushed in white above them. The line she had read a dozen times that day with no idea on earth what it meant. Eldon told her what it meant. He told her that in this trade, lead is dear and nothing ever sits idle. That when a job is finished, you break the forme apart and throw the type back in the pot and melt it down to a silver river and cast it fresh for the next man's words. That a printer kills 1,000 pages a year that way and thinks nothing of it at all. That everything a man sets, he sets, knowing he will unset it inside the week. But not this one, the old man said. 40 years. I watched him melt down every word he ever made and never blink. This one he never touched. He kept the metal standing the better part of 30 years sooner than let your name go back in the pot. You hear what I'm telling you? Of all the work that man ever locked up in iron, this was the one he would not break. Not for money, not for room, not for anything anybody could put in front of him. And then Eldon did a thing that surprised her. He reached past the chase to the platen they had just pulled the sheet from and worked his thick fingers up under the packed layers of the timpan, the soft sheets where the paper rides, and he drew out a folded square of stiff paper gone soft along its creases, and he put it in her hand without opening it. It was the deed itself, the drawn one, the signed one, blue ink and a notary's pressed gold seal, and a date from a spring before her mother ever ran, the lawyer's hand and Walter Price's shaking hand, and on the witness line, plain as a fence post in a field, the name Eldon Krause, the one with teeth in it. He had set it in metal to say it forever, and he had drawn it in ink to make it stand up in the law. And he had hidden the ink one in the single place in all the world where a stranger clearing junk would never think to reach, and a printer's own blood would be led straight to it. She did not wait for Friday. In the morning, she walked the 8 blocks down Campbell Avenue to the Roanoke City Courthouse with the folded deed and the soft band of savings bonds and the proof dried flat between 2 boards. And she laid them on the counter in front of a clerk who unfolded the deed and read it and turned it to the light for the seal and went very still and called somebody else over. They entered the transfer into the deed books that same hour, volume and page, ink on the public record where no developer's permit could reach in and touch it. And the clerk stamped the back and said the one word, recorded, and slid it across the counter back into Hannah's hands. By noon, a probate hold sat over the estate of Walter Price and froze every paper Garrett Voss had filed against the block. When his machines came rolling up the wet street that Monday with their yellow arms folded for work, they found a stop order taped square to the gray door and a building that was no longer his to scrape. And after a while, the engines went quiet and the trucks backed out into Campbell Avenue and were gone. And nobody laughed this time. And not one man in that cab ever knew that the broke girl they had hired to empty the place had been handed the deed to her own blood and told to throw it in a dumpster by the end of the week. By the next dusk, the lights were on in the soot brick storefront, burning yellow and warm out through the old wavy glass into the blue end of the day, with the Blue Ridge gone soft and dark at the foot of the street and the star coming on up on Mill Mountain over the town. The press was running. Hannah stood at the wheel with her sleeves rolled to the elbow and ink to the second knuckle, pulling sheets slow the way Eldon stood at her shoulder and showed her, and on the front window, where she had been hired to scrape the old letters off the glass, the name Price still stood in its flaked gold, and she had no plan in this world of ever taking it down. In the window, a fresh sheet hung drying, propped where the whole street could see it. Her name stood forward on it at last, black and certain, facing Campbell Avenue.